The stranger who knew my fate before I did. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but here we are. It's been years, and I still can't shake the feeling that something unnatural happened to me. Something I can't explain. I've told this story to a few people, but no one ever believes me. Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. But I need to get it out there because it's been eating at me for too long. It all started back in 2018. I was living in a small town in the middle of nowhere, working a dead-end job at a gas station. Life was boring, predictable, and honestly kind of depressing. The town was one of those places where everyone knew everyone, and nothing ever happened. The most exciting thing that had occurred in the last decade was when Old Man Jenkins' cow got loose and wandered into the library. So, when things started to get weird, I wasn't prepared. Not even close. It was around 11 p.m., and I was closing up the gas station. The place was empty, as usual. The flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of stale coffee and motor oil hung in the air. I was counting the cash in the register when I heard it. A faint knock on the glass door. I froze. We didn't get customers this late, especially not on a Tuesday. I looked up, and there he was, a man, standing outside the door, staring at me. He was tall, wearing a long black coat that seemed to swallow him whole. His face was pale, almost ghostly, and his eyes were the kind of black that made you feel like you were staring into a void. I hesitated, but something about him made me uneasy. Still, I figured he was just a traveler, or maybe someone who'd broken down on the highway. So, I walked over and unlocked the door. "Sorry, we're closed," I said, trying to sound firm. He didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me with those empty eyes. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and pointed to the coffee machine behind me. "I need coffee," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like it hadn't been used in years. I don't know why, but I let him in. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was fear. Either way, I stepped aside and he walked in, his coat brushing against the doorframe as he passed. He moved strangely, like his limbs didn't quite belong to him. I went behind the counter and started making the coffee, tried to ignore the way he was watching me. When I handed him the cup, he didn't say thank you. He just took it, his fingers brushing against mine. They were ice cold. He sat down at one of the tables near the window, sipping the coffee slowly, never taking his eyes off me. I tried to focus on closing up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt heavier, like the room was closing in around me. After what felt like an eternity, he stood up and walked back to the counter. He set the empty cup down and leaned in close, his face just inches from mine. "You're not supposed to be here," he whispered. I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, black notebook. He set it on the counter and slid it toward me. "Take it," he said. "It's yours now." I didn't want to touch it, but something compelled me to pick it up. The moment my fingers brushed against the cover, a chill ran down my spine. The man turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there, clutching the notebook. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the man, about the way he looked at me, about the notebook. When I finally opened it the next morning, I realized it wasn't empty. The pages were filled with names, dates, and locations. Some of them were places I recognized, local landmarks, streets, even the gas station where I worked. But others were unfamiliar, written in a language I couldn't understand. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. But then, something strange happened. A few days later, I was driving home from work when I saw one of the locations from the notebook, a rundown house on the edge of town. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. I parked my car and walked up to the front door, the notebook tucked under my arm. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The house was dark and smelled of mildew. As I walked through the rooms, I noticed something strange. The walls were covered in symbols, just like the ones in the notebook. And then I heard it, a faint whispering coming from the basement. I should have left. I know that now. But I didn't. I followed the sound down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the bottom, I saw it, a circle drawn on the floor, surrounded by candles. And in the center of the circle was the man from the gas station. He was kneeling on the ground, his head bowed. When he looked up at me, his eyes were no longer black. They were glowing, a bright, unnatural blue. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice echoing in the small space. I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot. The man stood up and walked toward me, his movements fluid and unnatural. He reached out and touched my forehead, and suddenly, everything went black. When I woke up, I was back in my car, parked outside the gas station. The notebook was gone. At first, I thought it had all been a dream. But then, I noticed something, a mark on my forehead, right where the man had touched me. It was faint, but it was there, a symbol just like the ones in the notebook. I tried to forget about it, to move on with my life. But strange things kept happening. I'd hear whispers in the middle of the night, see shadows moving in the corners of my vision. And then there were the dreams, vivid, terrifying dreams of the man of the house of the circle. One night, I woke up to find myself standing in the middle of the woods, miles from my house. I had no memory of how I got there. My feet were bare and my clothes were torn. The symbol on my forehead was burning, like it had been freshly carved into my skin. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing. What was happening to me? Was I losing my mind? Or was something else going on? The next day, I decided to do some research. I went to the local library and started digging through old newspapers and town records. That's when I found it. An article from the 1920s about a series of disappearances in the area. The victims had all been found in the same rundown house I'd visited. Their bodies arranged in a circle, with strange symbols carved into their skin. The article mentioned a man, a drifter who'd been seen in the area around the time of the disappearances. He was described as tall, wearing a long black coat, with eyes so dark they seemed to swallow the light. The police had never caught him, and the case had gone cold. I felt a chill run down my spine. Was it the same man? Was he still out there after all these years? And if so, what did he want with me? I didn't have to wait long to find out. A few nights later, I was woken by a loud banging on my front door. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. When I opened the door, there was no one there. But on the doorstep was the black notebook. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The pages were filled with new names, new dates, new locations. And at the very end, there was a message written in bold, jagged letters. It's time. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That a man in a black coat had given me a creepy notebook, and now I was having bad dreams? They'd think I was crazy. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went to the last location listed in the notebook. It was an old church on the outskirts of town, one that had been abandoned for decades. The doors were locked, but I found a broken window and climbed inside. The air was thick with dust, and the floor creaked under my feet. I made my way to the altar, where I found another circle surrounded by candles. And in the center of the circle was me. I don't mean a picture of me or a statue. It was me, my body, lying on the ground, my eyes closed, the symbol on my forehead glowing faintly. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. Was I dead? Was this some kind of vision? Before I could make sense of it, I heard a voice behind me. "You're late." I turned around, and there he was, the man in the black coat. His eyes were glowing blue again, and he was holding a knife. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaking. He smiled a cold, empty smile. "You already know." And then he lunged at me. I don't remember much after that. I remember fighting, struggling, the feel of the knife in my hand. I remember the sound of his voice, whispering in my ear. And I remember the moment I plunged a knife into his chest, the way his body crumpled to the ground, the way his eyes faded from blue to black. When it was over, I was alone in the church, the notebook clutched in my hands. The symbol on my forehead was gone, and the whispers in my head had stopped. But I knew it wasn't over. Not really, because as I left the church, I saw something in the distance, a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching me, a figure in a long black coat. So that's my story. Believe it or not, it's the truth. And if you ever see a man in a black coat with eyes like a void, don't let him in. Whatever you do, don't let him in.